Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today we are reviewing Ferrari, starring Adam Driver and Penelope Cruz, directed by Michael Mann in his first directorial effort since 2015's Black Hat. And I have to say that from the trailer, this was not a film that I was particularly excited about or interested in. It was giving off very House of Gucci vibes, both from a visual standpoint and also from the fact that it was about a kind of dramatic tension between this power couple. And having seen it now, I'm thankful to say that it was not the train wreck that House of Gucci was, but nor is it the engaging, compelling biopic that it could have been. I am a really big fan of Michael Mann, that rhymed, but he is not my favourite. I think it's a fantastic film, but my favourite, and it's probably one of my favourites of all time, is Collateral. I just love the themes, I love the noir visual style, I love the action. I think it's one of Tom Cruise's best, if not his best film. Loved Last of the Mohicans, and I really enjoyed, despite the critics, his adaptation of Miami Vice. I thought his visual style translated very well to that kind of film. But that being said, Black Hat was atrocious, so I was very intrigued to see him return to filmmaking, especially with this sort of film, which seemed a bit more out of his comfort zone. The film follows Enzo Ferrari during a very pivotal phase in both his personal and professional life. His company, Ferrari, is on the brink of bankruptcy, and he's doing whatever it takes to boost their sales and get back into the production race as being a very competitive industry conglomerate. But then it's also following the fallout of the death of his first son and his very fractious relationship with his first wife and his affair with Shailene Woodley's character and his son by her. Honestly, my biggest problem with this film, and I think it's the biggest red flag that I was getting from the trailer, is that it was just boring. Visually and narratively, I just never think it comes to life in the way that it needs to in order to be compelling or engaging. I don't think there's anything wrong with the performances, and if anything, I think the performances are too good for the characters. But I think that Enzo Ferrari as a kind of figurehead lead character is just not very compelling. The way he's written and depicted, whether it's true to life or not, is as a very wooden, very reserved character. He's not very expressive, he's not very emotive. He's a very rigid individual who wears shades a lot of the time, so you kind of don't get the chance to see Adam Driver's acting really shine through. So I never found myself rooting for Enzo Ferrari during this film or during his exploits. The standout performance for me was definitely Penelope Cruz. I feel like Adam Driver's good, but the material and the portrayal that they're going for really doesn't give him much flexibility with his acting range, whereas Penelope Cruz is the opposite. I think a lot of her scenes really allow her to dig into quite a vast emotional playground. It does make for a really interesting couple of scenes with this power couple, but unfortunately they are too few and far between. The other thing that I just found really distracting in this film was the visual style and the colour scheme. For me, visually, the only thing that pops in the film, and it was definitely a deliberate editing choice, is the colour red on the Ferraris during the racing sequences. Everything else has this very desaturated, that typical Italian filter look, where everything is very beige, very colourless, and just sterile. And I think that seeps into the film's narrative as well. Across the board, you know, the costumes, historically accurate though they may be, the buildings, and although that does make the racing scenes pop in the countryside a little bit more, it ultimately bogs down the rest of the film, which is ultimately where we spend most of the screen time. Sterile is the word I would use to describe this film. It never comes to life to the extent that it needs to. If there's one thing that saves it, it is the racing scenes. There is only really one, and that is the kind of big final race, Le Mille. And that is when Michael Mann's veteran history as an action filmmaker really comes into its own. A practical action filmmaker, I should probably add. These real tangible vehicles hurtling around these real tight corners and roads. The edit and the way that they cut that together. The sound design, of course, is top quality. And it is one of the only times in the film that you feel like there's an engaging aesthetic taking place. It does eventually gel into quite a riveting final race sequence. But before even the racing sequences kick into gear, you have this problem where all of the cars look the same, all of the characters look the same, and the quick cut editing of the race itself makes it very hard to distinguish who is who. And the film has not done a good enough job prior to that of establishing these races and these characters enough for you to be able to tell them apart. So Ferrari was definitely a misfire for me. It has a couple of moments where it feels dramatic, where it feels memorable, but for the most part it is a run-of-the-mill depiction. And there's one crucial scene that cuts back and forth between the racers training for their big race and some dramatic sequences happening in Enzo Ferrari's personal life. And they're intercut to show his divide, his kind of mental headspace cut across these two different assets of his life, personal life, professional life, his inability to reconcile them and to have them coexist, which is ultimately what the film is about. And the depiction of that in the editing is meant to represent how he doesn't have the ability to gel those two things together. And I think that speaks to the bigger problem of the film as well, which is that it cannot decide whether it wants to be an interesting family drama or an engaging high-stakes sports drama. So the ingredients of the good film are there. I just don't think the screenplay and the editing gets the ratios right of how much time we spend focused on what. If you have seen it, guys, do drop a comment below and let me know your thoughts on the film. Please also consider liking and subscribing to the channel. That's always a huge help for me. And in the meantime, we'll see you for the next vid.